We move on to this final session. I'm delighted to welcome Jeff Collier, Chief Revenue Officer to SAP Intelligent Spend and Business Network. Our subject is procurement and supply chain challenges and solutions with SAP's Jeff Collier. What a great title. So a warm welcome for Jeff, please. Right, I'm going to start glass half empty. Let's start with the challenges, because then we can get to more positive things afterwards. So for you, current challenges that you see organisations facing, particularly when it comes to their supply chains?
It's probably something we all in the room here could share a lot of input on. It's a topic that we've all been a part of the last 5 years. We don't need to go back to COVID. It's a topic that we've all talked about, massive supply chain disruptions. Since that time, we've seen a lot of more isolated cases where if you're in the automotive industry, you dealt with the cable harnesses that only came from Ukraine. That was a surprising kind of tier 3 or tier 4 level problem. From Israel, now we see a lack of items for electronic components, fertilizer, and so these very specialized areas that cause big impacts. And you look at that and you say, well, how can technology help with that? Many of the people in the room, I'm sure, are part of their organizations trying to say, let's prevent that. Let's predict what the next disruptions will be so that we can maybe prevent them in the first place, which involves not just knowing who your suppliers are, but who your suppliers' suppliers are. It's a question as I travel around the world meeting with our customers, probably 80% of them come back to this very question of that challenge of how do you know who your third-tier suppliers are and what the risks are that are there. So technology can help. At SAP, my company, we've been doing a lot in this space to try and help share information up the stack, but sometimes not everyone's willing. And it can be a tough math problem. We had one of our Canadian manufacturers shared. They took their 11 significant suppliers and they did a little analysis, like how many of their suppliers mattered, and it was 300. And then when they went to the next question, let's see if we can do the math on how many of their suppliers, so now we're down 3 tiers, matter. And it was 12,000, which is a significant challenge for humans to keep track of. So that takes us back to technology.
Absolutely. I always find it fascinating speaking to people such as yourself from organisations such as SAP, because frankly, you speak to more people than I could, in my wildest dreams. You are meeting those people, you are hearing those problems and ultimately creating the solutions
Indeed.
to help them. When you're hearing those challenges, how does that help you shape the technology in that situation? Because if you are hearing from 80%, this is our blind spot, this is our problem area, does that really shape how the technology is designed from there?
In fact, I walk out of a lot of those meetings and I go back to our head of project engineering and I say, I've just come back from Australia, I've just come back from Singapore, and in 70% of those, they were asking for this very specific question about how to identify who the suppliers were locally. In Australia, they're trying to really direct sources to their local indigenous suppliers. And so whether it's a regulatory or a geographic goal or something about that material in the chain, that's what we can take back and try and build.
One thing I do like to do is, hang on, I'm talking to American, pop the hood or open the bonnet, depending on who's listening to this particular question. Always have to remember which audience I'm talking to. When you're working on that technology to solve that particular problem, how much work and testing goes into being able to solve that? Because there must have been a huge amount of development in that area. There
is, and it's, you brought up Americans. I thought we were going to go down the politics path. I'm glad we're not.
I'm not going there. No.
But how much work goes into it? As any technology company will tell you, you can't do everything. And that's where I like an event like this, where you get to know some of the other providers that are out there. Just yesterday at the awards, we saw some of the kind of upstart technology providers who are focused on supply chain risk. And we actually have some meetings with some of them that have come out of it. So it's really about the ecosystem of providers. In the sustainability space, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit, EcoVadis is a player that came up quickly to solve a need. And then the question was, well, how do you pull it into? In our world, we have a network of 5 million suppliers. So how do we change the technology to be able to import from an EcoVadis, for example?
Now, again, tapping into the experience you have of talking to people all over the world through your position, are there any sort of key strategies that you've seen come across how people are leveraging your technology to solve those problems? Any that really jump out at you that have impressed you, surprised you, that you'd want to share? Any
strategies? That's a great question. One of the biggest, there are a couple things, I guess, that come to mind. What I hear as much as anything is trying to do more with less. If it's trying to get your hands on 12,000 data about 12,000 suppliers, that's too large a task for humans to go. And so you get to the question of how can technology or how can AI help? And so that's one. I'm seeing companies all over the world pilot various ways of using AI. And I know it's been a topic for a lot of the sessions here. The other has been change management. It's much of what involves technology involves the users within an organization, but for supply chain or for procurement, it's a two-sided model. You're asking them to do things differently. Your internal stakeholders and employees, but also these suppliers and maybe their suppliers who don't necessarily have an interest or don't need to because they have many buyers they could sell to. So those that are the most successful are those that spend the most amount of money on change, on managing and educating the why. Why are we asking you to use this technology? What's in it for you as a supplier or a logistics provider? That's probably number one.
Let's move on to some of the future trends. It'd be very easy for us to say, yep, AI is the future trend. Let's move on to the next question. We can all go home in time for tea. Is it as simple as that? Is AI going to be solving lots of these challenges? It is already solving a lot of them. Is it the only way forward? Are there other things at play? Where does it sit for you?
It's no, by no means is it just technology. I mean, technology ultimately is about data, and getting access to data is hard. Right? Those in this room who are involved with supply chain, right back to when you're talking about multiple tiers, you don't always have access to that data. You don't always have suppliers who are willing to provide that data, whether it's about the material or the inventory or how soon they can provide it, or whether it's about their child labor levels or the sustainability or the scope 3 data that you're trying to collect. And so there has to be this willingness to provide data. Regulations help. We've seen with sustainability, it's something we've talked about for a long time. A lot of CEOs are interested and they're driving. A lot of employees are really excited about it, but to ultimately spend the money to do what's necessary to share the sustainability or the carbon impact of products or services takes a lot more, and regulations sometimes help.
Absolutely. As I was just mentioning to you off stage, I was at your Spend Connect event in Vienna last year, had a lovely time. AI was a huge talking point, and you could feel the buzz in the room as each new announcement was made. A phenomenally exciting time to be working in this particular space at the moment, solving these challenges. What's the future of it? Because it seems with each new announcement, each new development, it's almost like another challenge has been ticked off or improved. An exciting time.
Well, it is, and we've all talked about it. You can look at the stock market and see the multiples on some of these companies, software, hardware companies, but it's for good reason. Supply chain's unique because it was one of the original areas where complex math really showed itself. I mean, the original availability to promise or transportation or inventory optimization involved linear algebra, which is constraint-based, which ultimately required software to do calculations. So in supply chain, we've seen the power the math can have, and now we're talking about taking the next leap forward. We're in our world, in the SAP world, we're doing things as simple as trying to help suppliers generate catalogs automatically, write descriptions that are more effective to help them promote themselves to the buyers, which is good for their business. On the buying side, the sourcing side with category managers, we've added some AI to generate cost breakdown structures by categories, to pull in some of the third-party data to generate a market dynamics view, just to do some of the difficult time-consuming work, which can be, in most cases, more accurate. So I think that's the next step, and then where it really gets interesting is what a lot of us have seen as consumers is more of a chat-based co-pilot that exists. SAP has one. Many other organizations are going down this path where you can ask questions, and systems can be asking questions, and we truly do get this productivity lift going back to doing more with less.
Well, we've looked at some of the current challenges. I'll ask you now to get out your SAP-branded crystal ball. Okay. Which, if you'd be so kind. Let's look at these features. Did you forget it? I do apologise.
Do you have one I can borrow?
Somewhere out the back.
Okay.
Let's look at some of the future challenges. Where do you see them coming from? Are there any curveballs, if you like, that you're expecting, well, that may be coming our way? If you expected it, it wouldn't be a curveball, that you see coming up in the future for supply chains?
I'd be curious to hear. I wish we could do a survey of some sort and hear from the room some of theirs as well. That is the magic question.
Yeah.
What I think a lot of people would agree we see is sub-geographic challenges where there are borders, the deglobalization that's happening that has a large impact on, it can cause significant disruptions on supply chain and can cause different bounties and costs to go up. Inflation is honestly one of the hardest factors in the equation now. You look at central banks that are often lowering interest rates around the world, understandably so because of some labor concerns, but you see inflation. FedEx just raised their package prices by 6% starting in January just last week. I'm sure for good reason, but that's the wild card, it's the tiger's tail that's hard to get a hold of. And then labor. I don't see organizations, I don't see companies going off and hiring significantly. We have a view to contingent labor. One of our solutions called Fieldglass gives us a view into the world's use of contingent labor, and it surged for the 2 years after COVID, especially in life sciences, high tech, banking. But more recently, as the economy has risen, the contingent labor usage hasn't as much. And so I think we're going to have to use technology to respond to all of these.
Okay, well, let's go interactive for a second here.
Okay.
We have a room full of people. Would anyone like to present a particular challenge that you'd like Jeff to react to or give his take on it? A hand or two would be much appreciated, or this section really will not work. I can't see any hands. Would anyone fancy being brave on this? I'm taking that as an absolute... Right. Oh, we have one at the back. I apologise. Thank you so much, or else I would have fallen utterly flat there. So...
Hi there, so Chris Warren from Insight Software. So I was dealing with a client recently, just going back to your tier 1, 2, 3, 4 command actually. It was an automotive manufacturer in the UK. And they were saying the biggest challenge is not necessarily the technology, it's actually accessing the data. So in your experience of seeing what you're seeing at the level that you work at, how are you seeing people overcome the challenge of actually accessing the data? Because tier 1 data is very easy because that's in my world, but tier 2, 3, 4 is out of my control, but yet affects me in such a big way.
It's a great question. Actually, strangely enough, I was in Coventry myself yesterday morning at an automotive manufacturer, and the automotive industry tends to be the most sharing. I'm going to Germany tomorrow to meet with an OEM, and they often, as you probably know, have contractual requirements that give visibility at different levels just because of the nature of the automotive manufacturing. Other industries aren't that way. There's competition, there's refusal, there's suppliers don't feel the need to. And so it goes back to how do you incent? We've seen organizations use financing as a way to help suppliers with cash flow in exchange for more data. Higher volumes, committing to higher units through that supplier in return for the data, because you're right, the technology doesn't matter. AI is based on using that data.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and I'm glad we did get a taker on that, or else that would have really fallen flat, that end of it. So we will look to wrap things up there. So my thanks to Jeff Collier, Chief Revenue Officer at SAP Intelligent Spend and Business Network. Our thanks to Jeff.
Thank you.